The Israeli public is going through some heated times, and we're having many political discussions and debates over this judicial reform that is on hand. Actually, 70% of the Israeli public think that there needs to be a judicial reform, that there needs to be changes in the judicial power, but also many feel that this reform that's now at hand is actually going a little bit too quickly and pushing a little bit too hard. The right feel that this is our opportunity to help balance an unbalanced system, and the left, on the other hand, think that by weakening the Supreme Court, you're removing a major checks and balance in the system and giving way too much power to the executive branch. Israel has a parliament system where we have three branches. We have the executive branch, head by the prime minister, the legislative branch, which is the Knesset, and the judicial, which includes both the lower courts and the Supreme Court. Now, the parliament system requires the executive branch to form a coalition of at least 61 seats in the 120 Knesset members. The courts are supposed to safeguard the rule of law and make sure that civil and human rights are maintained. The problem is that many feel they're overstepping their boundaries and taking on way too much power in interfering in a lot of political issues, also having the final word in major core Israeli issues, and they are unelected. They don't really represent the people. This mainly began in 1995 in what's known as the Constitutional Revolution, led by the then Supreme Court President Aharon Barak, who led judicial activism. And basically, we can intervene and we can judge on every matter. It's important to know that in Israel, unlike most other countries, we don't have a constitution. In the 90s, they gave themselves the right to begin to obliterate laws if they hindered upon what they call the basic laws they made to be on the level of constitution, and then if a law in their opinion were to hinder upon these, then they can obliterate the law. So why now? Why is this so important to do now? So Justice Minister Yariv Levin said he realized that the system was unbalanced 20 years ago, and basically he's been working on this for 20 years to try to find a way to make the system more balanced. But only now do they really have an opportunity to pass these laws, because this is the most right-wing and religious government we've had ever. And even Netanyahu, with his previous governments, there was always some left or center party that would hinder upon any reform, especially a reform that's so strong like this one. Let's get into some of the details. What does this reform even include? So there's three main points that this reform includes. The first one is, how do we appoint new Supreme Court judges? So the way it works today, to appoint new judges, you need a majority in a committee that is comprised of residing judges from the Bar Association and representatives from the government. And the bar, together with the new judges, always had a majority. So they were able to appoint judges that were like-minded, and mostly judges that supported the judicial activism led by Aharon Barak. There is a real pain among religious and right-wingers that the Supreme Court has a left political agenda, and in this reform, the government officials will actually have a majority in the committee that will vote for judges. The second one is the override clause, or we could call it also, who has the last word? Like I mentioned, they have been using the basic laws to establish a judicial review of Knesset legislation. In the reform, they actually will be given a more formal jurisdiction to cancel laws, but in order to do this, they will need an 80% majority, can override this decision by a 61 majority. This will be done in the current term of the Knesset, and then will have to be reopened in the next Knesset. Those who oppose say that a majority of 61, because the coalition already has a majority of 61, basically what you're doing is you're not having any gatekeeper, because you're able to override any decision of the Supreme Court. So some people also say the override clause is good, but maybe we need more of a majority. The third one is the legal advisors. Basically today, every minister has a legal advisor, but their decisions are binding, meaning you can't go against their word. So this reform says instead of allowing their interpretation of the law to intervene and interfere in every decision, we want them to be our legal advisors, just like every company needs a legal advisor to say what can and can't be done, and we can choose to listen to them. But it's not like we have to listen to them or that their decision is binding. Those who oppose say that this is a major gatekeeper, and basically what you're doing is you're allowing ministers to openly and blatantly break the law. So why are people so against it? Why are tens of thousands of protesters taking to the streets? These changes are very fundamental in the system. The Supreme Court is a gatekeeper, and a lot of these people feel that by weakening the Supreme Court, which is one of the only gatekeepers that Israel has, you're really weakening the democracy, and you're giving way too much power to the executive branch, who is already powerful and doesn't have that many checks and balances. My friend at work who is taking to the streets, and he is a leftist, he told me that he hasn't felt this way in 20 years, that he's losing his country. The country is getting a lot more right-wing and a lot more religious, and so the subtext of this all is, once we get rid of this, left-wing gatekeeper, the Supreme Court, who is the gatekeeper, who knows what these, religious, right-wing crazos are going to do here. Which groups are very much against it? So interestingly, high-tech firms have sort of come together, and they are one of the major opponents of this reform. Also, economists warn that this can hurt Israelis' credit, and it could hurt investments, because investors like stability, they don't like political strife or the system changing so often, and also they like countries where the rule of law is very strong, and they know that their investment is very safe and not dependent on any coalition, this or other, that will come. And who are mostly for it? So like we said, there's right-wingers and religious people who basically are fed up with the Supreme Court acting like they're a political party and intervening all the time on major Israeli core issues that should be determined by the people. Why is Prime Minister Netanyahu being pretty silent on this matter? And the reason is because he himself is facing an indictment. He has several investigations against him, so he has a conflict of interest, and if he gets involved, or if this reform passes as it is, basically the judges can be changed, and the coalition will have a lot of power in deciding who these judges are, and then maybe he could choose judges that he knows will be, I guess, less tough. Know that he is in favor of the reform, but he's keeping quiet on this because he does have an ongoing trial and there is a conflict of interest. So basically, to summarize, if you agree with the reform and its laws, you just think that we are fixing an unbalanced system, and we're making sure that the representative elects have the power, and that the legislators have the power and they represent the people. And if you're against the reform, you think that this will majorly harm democracy, give way too much power to the executive, and remove one of the only gatekeepers and checks and balances that is needed in our system. Most Israelis want some sort of compromise. They do think that the system needs to be reformed and better balanced, but maybe some of the details can be softened. For example, instead of 61 in the override clause, maybe we'll need a higher majority, and hopefully we can dialogue about this. Currently, there's a little bit of a problem dialoguing because they say, we want you to stop passing laws, let's dialogue while you stop the process. And the people that are pushing for the reform saying, this is what my constituents want. This is what I promised them. I'm not going to stop, passing these laws. I am open to dialogue. I'm open to changes, but I'm not going to just stop. We won the election. We have an opportunity now to make these changes. I'm not going to stop. And the other side is saying, we can't talk while you are going ahead so quickly and so fast with your laws and stop the process, and then we can talk. At the end of the day, we are brothers. I have people at work, we're having a lot of heated discussions at work, especially two people. One is on the far right and one is on the far left, and they're having extremely heated discussions and arguments and fighting, and after it, they give each other a hug or a handshake, and this is the story of the Israeli people. Each side, does what they think is best for Israel and for its democracy. But at the end of the day, we are one people. If you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy my video I made explaining the issues that were on hand in our recent elections and some of the major issues in the Israeli public and things that we are at odds with. So hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. I'm